Welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. This weekend, the United States, Britain and France fired airstrikes on facilities said to be producing chemical weapons in Syria. U.S. President Donald Trump hailed the strike as perfectly executed, saying it was mission accomplished. More than 100 missiles struck in response to a suspected deadly chemical attack in Duma last week.
President Trump's verdict of the success of the strike came hours after he spoke to the American people about the order.
I ordered the United States Armed Forces to launch precision strikes on targets associated with the chemical weapons capabilities of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. A combined operation with the armed forces of France and the United Kingdom is now underway. We thank them both.
In the early hours of Saturday morning, the U.S., the U.K. and France launched simultaneous attacks on the neighborhood of Kiswa in Damascus suburbs. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said a total of 3 scientific research centers had been hit in the attacks, 2 in Damascus and 1 in the Homs area, in addition to military bases in Damascus. The observatory said all the bases and facilities struck in the attack had been evacuated by the Syrian government earlier this week. The strikes were the biggest interventions by Western powers against Assad in the country's 7-year-old civil war and pitted the United States and its allies against Russia, which itself intervened in the war in 2015 to support Assad. During a briefing at the U.S. Pentagon, Defense Secretary James Mattis says the airstrikes on targets in Syria were a one-time shot to send a strong message to President Bashar al-Assad.
The first target was a scientific research center located in the greater Damascus area. This military facility was a Syrian center for the research, development, production, and testing of chemical and biological warfare technology. The second target was a chemical weapons storage facility west of Homs. We assessed that this was the primary location of Syrian sarin and precursor production equipment. The third target, which was in the vicinity of the second target, contained both a chemical weapons equipment storage facility and an important command post.
French President Emmanuel Macron on Saturday says he'd ordered a military intervention in Syria alongside the U.S. and Britain in an attack on the chemical weapons arsenal of the country's regime. Macron, who tweeted a picture of himself in a meeting room with military and diplomatic advisers, said a debate about France's military involvement will take place in Parliament. British Prime Minister Theresa May said it was right and legal to order cruise missile strikes against Syria. She said the aim was to deter the Syrian authorities from further use of chemical weapons and to send a message to the wider world that it was unacceptable to use such weapons.
British, French and American armed forces conducted coordinated and targeted strikes to degrade the Syrian regime's chemical weapons capability and deter their use. For the UK's part, 4 RAF Tornado GR4s launched Storm Shadow missiles at a military facility some 15 miles west of Homs, where the regime is assessed to keep chemical weapons in breach of Syria's obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention. While the full assessment of the strike is ongoing, we are confident of its success.
She said intelligence and open source accounts indicated that the Syrian government was behind the attack in Douma last Friday. She, however, declined to say whether Syrian President Bashar al-Assad should stay in power and said talks with allies will continue on finding a political solution to the civil war.
Russia has condemned the U.S. action in Syria, saying the U.S. and its allies continue to demonstrate blatant disregard for international law. The Russian ambassador to the UN, speaking on behalf of the government, said it was shameful that the U.S. Constitution was cited as a reason to launch military action. Now, I spoke with Professor Agbu just a while ago. He is of the Department of International Relations and Diplomacy at Bayes University, Abuja, on the implications of the action by the U.S., the U.K. and France, and the response expected from Russia and the international community. Professor Agbu, thank you for joining us on the program. Was this a wise move, conducting the airstrikes on Syria by the US, the UK and France?
I do not think it's a very wise move at this time, at this point in time, even though there are very serious grounds for trying to take some action, especially when issues of the use of chemical and biological weapons are involved. The world frowns at it right beginning from the Geneva Convention of 1925, that countries should not employ chemicals and biological instruments of warfare. Having said that, it is neither here or there on whether actually Syria used the chemical weapons on her own citizens. It is not the first time that we have had such accusations. And for the United States and her allies, who, by the way, have very serious interests in Syria and on the outcome of the Syrian crisis, to preemptively decide to attack with missiles some of the Syrian installations, I don't think it's a wise thing at this time. I do not think it will help the peace process of eventually trying to get all the parties to the conflict to the negotiating table for a sustainable solution to the Syrian crisis. It is a very complex crisis. It is not like Iraq. It is not like Libya. It's not like Afghanistan even. It's a very serious crisis.
What do you make of the reason, the excuse that these countries are giving? Because President Trump today tweeted that this was mission accomplished. The UK and France are saying that this will serve as deterrent to Russia, that it cannot violate international conventions by using chemical weapons on its people. When you consider what has happened in the countries you mentioned, Iraq and in Libya, and the fact that inspectors were supposed to arrive in Syria on Saturday morning to carry out independent investigations into whether or not there was a chemical attack in Douma, does this sound legitimate to you, the excuse by these Western allies?
Yeah, it's a bit worrisome, because many people have also expressed that view. Why couldn't the United States and her allies have waited a few more days for the inspectors to actually ascertain that chemical weapons were actually used? Even if the chemical weapons had been used, how are we sure that it was actually used by the Syrian government?